Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We got a lot to get to. It is one of those types of weeks that's a little bit sneaky, Abe Gordon. It's one where you may not have an Alabama and a Georgia on the schedule. You may not have an Ohio State and Michigan on the schedule. You may not have one of those top 5 matchups or something crazy. But you know what? That generally means somebody is going to have what happened to Ole Miss last week happen to them. It's very possible. It's almost probable it's going to happen to somebody. Is it going to be Tennessee? Is it going to be Georgia? Who's it going to be? There are a lot of teams. Michigan's one of those squads. They're taking a road trip out to Seattle to go see a new friend in the Big Ten and Washington. So I wonder who it could be. We'll talk about all of that. This is the Week 6 preview show. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. We're going to get into all of that. But we got to wait just a second because I got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, you're right, Garrett. It's another watch out weekend. One ranked matchup, and that includes the number 25 team. So a lot of ranked playing unranked opponents, but that does not mean there is not danger lurking with every kickoff. So excited to sit through it.
Yeah, and danger indeed if you are the Missouri Tigers, a team that has been struggling a little bit. Haven't lost yet. They're 1-0 in conference play. They had that win over Vanderbilt. That was a bit of a squeaker. They also had the win over Boston College. That was a bit of a squeaker. They've had a couple of these types of situations this season. Missouri, we'll see who they actually end up being, but this is really their first big test of the season. They take a road trip out to Aggie Land. We'll see what they can do over there in Texas. But look, ultimately, at the end of the day, they had a pretty good running back there last year. They have a pretty good wide receiver there this year. They have a pretty good quarterback under center. But as far as Missouri, it's just been a little lackluster. Feels like it's been, I don't want to call it fool's gold, Abe, but they haven't really been a sexy pick. It's kind of a sexy upset pick, actually, with Texas A&M, a one-loss team with its only loss coming to a stout Notre Dame team. Since then, they've been a better program, better team this year. I mean, Marcel Reed under center, he's been strong. Could this be the week Connor Wegman comes back, or is this maybe the week that Marcel Reed kind of establishes himself and becomes the official starter? But it's Eli Drinkowitz off of a bye week. That has generally trended in Missouri's favor. But for whatever reason, the general public seems to be all in on Texas A&M. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, you say, could this be an upset? Texas A&M's favored at home in this one, and I think it's because people believe in their defense, and right now maybe they don't believe in Missouri's offense. But you have got to remember one thing. Missouri has a top 10 talent in Luther Burden on the outside, and anytime he's in the game, their offense can explode. They haven't necessarily done it that often this year. We've seen it from time to time, but you do have to wonder if they force feed him a little bit more now that they're getting into some of the, let's just say, higher echelon SEC teams, especially defensively. So this one's going to be really interesting. You're right. We had that weird story about Marcel Reed's sister being on the Missouri staff, and she was kind of kept away from practice. So there's some odd stuff circling around this game.
So for anybody who's not aware of that situation, Marcel Reed's sister works on the staff at Missouri, and Eli Drinkowitz and the coaching staff are keeping her away from the facility. Feels a little strange, feels a little paranoid. If you ask me, this person's not even able to do her job. But Abe, what are your thoughts on that? Is it just college football being college football?
I guess so. I would be pretty disappointed in my boss if they felt I couldn't do my job without betraying them because of my brother. But being on the other side. But I'd be pretty frustrated at that if we're being honest. Mm-hmm. Look, the one thing we have seen from Missouri lately, specifically against that Vanderbilt squad, was maybe a slight opening and a slight introduction to Nate Noel, the running back. He goes for $199 in that one. Luther Burden had the 2 touchdowns, but Nate Noel was important too. They've been looking for the replacement for Schrader for this whole start of the season. If Noel can maybe bring a little bit more balance to that offense, then let Brady, Cook, and Luther Burden get after it at the right times. Maybe we will see an improved Missouri offense, but they have not been good enough defensively. and Texas A&M has. It's a very scary game in this one because that A&M line can get after you.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is an Aggies team that's tied for first in the SEC with 7 interceptions. This is a Missouri team that has not really been tested at all. I mean, like, if you look at it, it's a Boston College team that their biggest win of the season was a tight one against, at the time, an 0-2 Florida State squad. It's a Florida State squad that really hasn't done much to prove anybody wrong about how they're kind of a regressed unit. That was their best win, and then that's now Missouri's best win, unless you include a Vanderbilt team that's now lost to Georgia State. You know, and now they're going up against a test that they haven't faced yet this season. Maybe last year we can leave that in the past. They were a really stout defense. They were dominant on third down. They would rarely get into third and long situations. They would stay ahead of the chains, and little things like that were critical for them last year. And it helped because you had a guy behind you, being Brady Cook and Cody Schrader. You stayed ahead of the chains constantly. You never put yourself in a bad situation, and you saw how it burned teams like Tennessee. And it's how they stayed in the game against Georgia in Athens last year. But Texas A&M this year, it's a completely different type of test. And I mean, Texas A&M gets after it. They really do. I mentioned the interceptions, but they also have 32 tackles for loss, and they've held opponents to 100 yards or less in 3 straight games. I mean, I just have a hard time believing that Missouri is going to continue finding that level of success based off of the track record. If you look at the preseason expectations, we thought that this team was going to be able to take that next step, but Luther Burden hasn't necessarily broken out and been like that guy yet that we really saw glimpses of last season, where he might have been the best wide receiver in college football last year. He was in that conversation. He was that good. This year, I haven't heard the type of, hype and buzz around Luther Burden. And when you watch him play, I mean, he's solid. He's solid, but I need him to be spectacular in this game. If Missouri wants to go on the road and get a win, that would really establish what their credibility is moving forward. But look, this is a team that's fighting for recognition. They're fighting for prominence, and this is a bubbles team. Like, this is the new era of college football. You have to be impressive. You have to be a little bit sexy to the College Football Playoff Committee if you want to make a chance, make a run at a potential chance at a national championship. I understand if you just win the games in front of you, but I don't think Missouri is good enough to simply just win the games in front of them and make it. They're just not that type of team, in my opinion. They're a bubble type of team, which means you have to go on the road and get a win in a game like this. Texas A&M is a dominant team on defense, but flipping it over to the Aggies, they are not a dominant team on offense. They're not a team that's been super consistent over the course of this early part of the season. Yes, they're 4-1, that one loss to a pretty good Notre Dame team, but this is also a team that its best wins are against the likes of Florida. And all due respect to Florida, they're a fine football team. Not really. They're a struggling football team. Like, that's really the situation that they find themselves
What's
in.
below struggling? Can we? We went from
Well,
fine to
there are
struggling.
levels to this. There are levels to
under that?
this.
Yeah.
I just don't want to bury them. That's all. Speaking of Florida, they got an interesting matchup over there with Central Florida, a game that they are not. Are they favored in that one? They are favored in that one.
I think they're slight 2-point favorite.
Maybe it's basically a pick 'em at that one. That's going to be a good, interesting one. We'll get to that one here in our shout outs a little later on in the program. But I mean, Marcel Reed, is he going to be your starter? Is Connor Wegman going to be your starter? He's a game time decision, according to Mike Elko. But I don't know how you can go back at this point. Marcel Reed's given you a little bit more. He's been what Connor Wegman was supposed to be. That dual threat guy, the guy who's able to do a little bit of everything with his legs and then with his arm. And he hasn't made those types of mistakes that Connor Wegman seemed to make time and again. I think your offense is better with Marcel Reed. Yes, you have a less experienced guy, but it's not like Connor Wegman has all this experience to go around. He hasn't won at any big level. He hasn't won on any big stages. I mean, I don't understand what he's done necessarily to just get that job back, assuming he is healthy.
Yeah, and it's also just the ideal of explosion with the legs from Marcel Reed that you just aren't getting with Connor Wegman. I would not make a change in that one. On the Missouri side of things, I think Brady Cook needs to look to spread the ball around a little bit more. He's thrown 4 touchdowns, 1 interception on the season. all 4 touchdowns have gone to Luther Burden. Now, obviously, a lot of that is because Luther Burden is as talented as we believe him to be. But I think you can kind of fall in love with a guy that's that talented, and it maybe hampers your offense. I think he's got to make sure that he's aware of where Luther Burden is, but without necessarily focusing and forcing the ball there. I think there is a gear that this Missouri offense can hit. I'm just going to be honest here, Garrett. They were incredibly electric and explosive a year ago. Now, they haven't looked that way this year. Why not? Maybe once part of that is because they're not sneaking up on anybody. And I think there was an aspect of that last year. But I refuse to believe that Cody Schrader, who was kind of the heart and soul of this offense as a walk-on running back, is the reason why that this team can't be explosive this year. And so I'm looking for other areas. And I do just kind of wonder if Brady Cook is relying a little too much on Luther Burden. If he can spread it around a little bit, it'll open things up for the offense. It'll also open things up for Burden because the defense knows we got to maybe play a little D elsewhere along the field. So very interested to see if that is something maybe Missouri looks to do in this one, but it is a tough defense to do it against. This one, I mean, look, we've talked about a lot of games already over the course of the season. We got a lot more to go here, Garrett, but this is one of those that feels like, all right, if you're playing in the high 20s, mid 30s, Missouri probably wins. If you're playing in the low 20s, high teens, Texas A&M probably has a good shot to win.
Sure.
I think you can kind of make it that simple as what sort of game this is going to be based on how high the total ends up being.
I honestly don't see this game going too high. I think this is going to be a bit of a slop fest. Look, both these teams can play strong defense. We've seen that at times, and I think being at Texas A&M, I don't see Texas A&M necessarily as a super highly explosive offense. Maybe this is the week they prove us wrong, but I mean, I don't necessarily see them in that light. I think that this is going to be one of those games where it's going to be a race to 24 points in that kind of gap.
That was the exact number I was thinking of, man. I literally almost asked you if Missouri gets to 24, can Texas A&M get to 27? And I just don't know if the answer to that.
I don't know if anybody's getting to 27 points. It just doesn't feel like that type of game. But let's move into another game that's going to be kind of in that same vein, where one team is going to be chasing a point total. It's Auburn and Georgia. It's the what is this? The 128th meeting in the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Auburn has taken a road trip to Georgia. It's their first road trip of the season. They had a 5-game homestand and didn't go quite as well as they wanted it to. They're 2-3 on the season. They've had some nasty losses, 2 in conference play, the 2 to Arkansas and to Oklahoma. I'm still getting used to Oklahoma being a conference game. That's still going to be a little strange to me. But those 2, very disappointing if you're Auburn. Then you have the additional one against California. Pretty disappointing. And Abe, do you know the key theme in those? Interceptions. That's just kind of what's happened to Auburn this season. It's been the story of their year. But now you get the best team that you faced all season, by far the best defense that you faced all season, and probably the best offense that you will face all season up until you get to that final game of the year against Alabama. And this is going to be a tough one. If you're Auburn, you're going into a road environment. But on the other hand, you're looking at Georgia too. This is a team that's won 26 straight games at home. They don't lose at home. They're also a team before this game that didn't lose in the regular season. They had won 42 games in a row until they lose to Alabama. I think it's going to be interesting because you have an entire roster filled with players who have never lost in the regular season before. I am fascinated to see how they respond. Not that it's going to be all positive and they're going to come out and punch you in the mouth. They may not. They may not. They may come out and they might be a little sloppy. They might be a little shaken. I don't necessarily think that that's going to be the case. I actually think it's going to be the former. I think they're going to come out and kick the crap out of Auburn, unfortunately. This is a team that Georgia generally tends to dominate when they play in Athens. It's the inverse when they play at Jordan-Hare Stadium, but that's how most teams are when they play at Jordan-Hare Stadium, except for this season. But another interesting thing is the fact that this is only Georgia's second game at home this season. I found that kind of interesting when I was reading up on this one earlier in the week. They played the game against Tennessee Tech. And outside of that, this is the only game they played. They were on the road at Kentucky. They were on the road at Alabama last week in that loss. And then they were at a neutral site against Clemson week 1. But I think that there are a ton of compelling matchups, not necessarily as much on the field as much as it is what do both of these teams look like right now? Because I see a Georgia team that's coming off of a loss and coming back home after a huge result that didn't go in their favor in Tuscaloosa. But on the other hand, you have an Auburn team that they're out for blood. They're in desperation mode. This is a team that lost 3 games that I don't think that they were expecting to lose. You were probably the better team in all 3 of them. I mean, they should have beaten Oklahoma. They should have beaten Arkansas, but you just give away the ball in bad situations. And I think this is a spot where I think the line is sitting somewhere on like 14, 15 points or something, not spread. I'm talking about Auburn total points. If Auburn is able to find any kind of success, they got to force some turnovers. They have to get better, hold on to the ball, have some time of possession if they really want to have an opportunity in this game. But I really struggle to see a path forward for Auburn in this one. I don't necessarily see Georgia blowing them out. I see Georgia kind of jumping to a lead. I want to see them start faster. It's something they haven't really done at a very good level, a successful level over the last year and a half or so, at least since Carson Beck has taken over as starting quarterback. But Peyton Thorne, he's got to hold on to the football for Auburn. And Georgia, get out fast. Those are your 2 things that I'm looking at.
Yeah, there's a number of things to touch on here. I think for Peyton Thorne, it's which quarterback are you getting? Are you getting the one that threw 3 touchdowns and looked excellent for the majority of the game against Oklahoma? Or are you getting the one whose last consequential pass was intercepted, returned the other way, and cost you the game? I was shocked at how well he was playing for the majority of that game a week ago. But when push came to shove and they needed him to make a play, he made the one for Oklahoma, not for his own team, and that was a problem. And you talk about Georgia, this only being their second home game. Auburn had 5 straight home games to start the year. This is the first road game for Auburn this year, so that's going to be something to deal with as well. For Georgia, I want to see them pick up where they left off, and what I mean by that is obviously that frantic comeback against Alabama. Are you able to kind of start in that same manner? And like you said, get off to a better start, because that has been an issue for Georgia. If you're Auburn and you saw what Ryan Williams did, I'm asking Cam Coleman to do the exact same thing. Now,
Yes.
I know he's not quite Ryan Williams. I think we all have to admit that, but he's pretty darn good. He's not that far off. And so I'm going to attack Georgia the same way. I think, look, we're playing to compete and to win, right? Like if you're Peyton Thorne, if you're Hugh Freeze, you can't just sit there and try and protect the ball. Georgia's going to run away from this game with you. You got to take chances. And I think you got to float that ball up there to Coleman and see what happens. We saw Ryan Williams have a day against the Georgia secondary. And so I think you have to take your chances. And if Thorne gets picked off, then so be it. But yeah, I'm with you. I think you want to see Georgia come out and this is a pride thing for Georgia as well. And I know they traditionally started slow, and that's its own discussion. But despite the fact that Georgia will have its games down the road to prove the loss to Alabama is not going to define them. They've got games with Texas and with Ole Miss and with Tennessee. And ultimately, those results will be what defines Georgia's season. I do think they want to come out and remind people that what you saw a week ago, especially in the first half, is not what we are. And unfortunately for Auburn, they might be the team that just walks into Sanford Stadium at just the wrong time to deal with this Georgia team. And I'm not saying that they would beat Georgia in a different week or they may beat Georgia this week. Who knows? But I would be a little bit surprised if Georgia doesn't find a way to get out early in this one, and maybe not quite the way Alabama got out on them 28-0. But I would like to see that. And for Carson Beck, did they find something by attacking the ball down the field against Alabama? A lot of that may have done with situational defense, stuff like that. But interested to see if they air it out early with Carson Beck and kind of let him exercise that arm a bit.
Yeah, and look, the more I've been removed from that game, I've obviously we're located here in Atlanta, and you're going to see and hear a lot of different things with the dialogue and the fallout from that game. I mean, hell, you'll hear the fallout from that game for a while probably, and that's a nationwide thing, not just here in Atlanta, but it's especially prevalent here in the city. So we've heard a lot of it. Look, a lot of the errors and miscues that at first glance look like they were Carson Beck, in hindsight, and when you actually start seeing a lot of this other stuff, people look through the film and people go back through it. A lot of the mistakes that were made were not really Carson Beck mistakes. Some of those mistakes were Arian Smith mistakes, running the wrong route, not seeing a check down, a guy blowing a block. And then at that point, you get a Carson Beck who's pressing and looking to do a little bit too much. I'm interested, and I said this when I opened up, and I'll say it one more time because I think it is that important. The team that responds best in this game to the adversity that they are facing is the team that's going to come out on top on this game. Auburn is going to be playing with their hair on fire. Everything is on the table for Auburn right now. This is a rivalry game. Crazy things happen. But as far as Georgia's concerned, the way that they keep Auburn in this game and they let them hang around is by making a lot of those same mistakes that I was talking about with when Carson Beck in that first quarter, especially, and then moving into that second quarter. You cannot afford to make those mistakes and beat yourself. It doesn't matter if you turn the ball over 4 times. That's a very bad thing, and it's a recipe for an upset. You can't do that. I need to see Georgia respond, both on offense and on defense. On defense, you weren't tackling well. You got to be better. On offense, you were making mistakes. Too many miscues. I don't think Auburn has the weapons to hurt you. Obviously, there's no Jalen Milroe running around on that team. You got a Peyton Thorne who's thrown 6 interceptions in 4 games. They're going to give you the ball back, and they're going to give you opportunities. It's just Georgia's got to take advantage of those. They're in a spot we just haven't seen them in before. And so that's what I'm very interested to see the way they respond. But Cam Coleman is a great pull on your part. He is, I mean, he's averaging 23, 24 yards per catch this season. That they want to get him a little bit more involved. He is extremely explosive. He is one of those really, really talented wide receivers. But until he gets a guy who can consistently get him the football, we're not going to see his full potential. And I don't know if it's going to be today or this Saturday, but maybe it is. Maybe this is his coming out party because you're going to have a big audience here, 3:30 on ABC in this matchup. But let's move into another one, a game that a team that we haven't really seen a lot of this season. And if you've said that you've seen a lot of Ohio State, you're an Ohio State fan, probably, because a lot of the games that they played this season have not been a lot of anything. And they had Michigan State last week. Sure. It's a Jonathan Smith team that has shown improvement. But now you get a different type of test, a little bit heavier of a test, and it just sort of ramps up. That slow ramp up period for Ohio State is starting here. You got Iowa at home. An old friend, Cade McNamara, is going to be starting at quarterback here for the Hawkeyes. I say friend because he played at Michigan, and he beat Ohio State. I'm sure he still harbors a lot of the resentment that many people who I know and who've been to Michigan and they hate the entire state of Ohio. So I'm sure Cade McNamara is going to be feeling some of that residual sort of disdain for him. But I don't think this is about Cade McNamara. I think it's everybody around Cade McNamara. I think if this is a game that comes down to McNamara, then Ohio State's probably run out to about a 28-point lead in this game. Iowa's the way you win this game is you muck it up, and then you muck it up a little bit more, and then you throw a little quicksand out there, and then a little tar, and then you slow them down, and you muck it up even just a little bit more. That's the way you win this game because Jeremiah Smith and Will Howard and all the toys and the weapons and Mickey Ibuka and all these other guys, you're not going to be able to keep pace with that. But Ohio State, I don't know what they are. We have the preseason magazines that have told us what they are or what they could be. We know a lot of people have them as a national championship favorite or at least one of the front runners. They haven't been tested. We haven't seen what they actually look like. But is that going to happen this week, Abe?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the question I had for you. Is like, all right, so they beat a 3-1 Michigan State team a week ago, 38-7. I would say we probably didn't learn anything about Ohio State except for Jeremiah Smith can catch one-handed just as well as he can catch two-handed. Like I guess we figured that out.
In case anybody didn't know.
The question is, what are we going to learn in this one? I mean, if they beat Iowa 38-7, does that really prove anything? I'm not as high on this Iowa team as I had been on other Iowa teams. I think defensively, they're not quite where they have been in other years. Maybe slightly better offensively, but still not like threatening or good on offense. And so, yeah, I just, again, how do we find something out about Ohio State? I know they've got the Oregon game coming, and I guess that's how. But like, yeah, I can't pretend to sit here and say, hey, they beat Iowa 38-7, the same score they beat Michigan State by, and it was super impressive, and it really taught me something. And now I see them as true contenders. Like, no, like that's kind of what I expect, kind of what I feel. But you know, if like you said, Iowa does find a way to muck it up, and you know, Ohio State's got to scramble out to a 24-14 win. Like, do I downgrade them? Like, no, not really. That's kind of Iowa football, and it went in their favor, but Ohio State still won. So yeah, it's very tough. It's going to be very tough to learn about Ohio State, and quite frankly, I don't know how much I'll learn about them in that Oregon game either, because I just don't know if man for man they can bow up and get after it either. So it's going to be a long year of questions in regards to Ohio State as to whether they can match up with the true contenders.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. I mean, this is the Ohio State specialty. I mean, I've said this a few times on this podcast, and I don't mean to. I don't mean to come after Ohio State quite like this as hard as I do, but maybe I do. I don't know, but they ramp up. Their ramp up period is so comically long, and I mean, all due respect to Iowa and to Michigan State, and this is an Iowa team it's hyper one dimensional. They've been hyper one dimensional for a while. But that one,
but even that one dimension has been really like among the best in college football in previous years.
5, 6, 10 years or so.
It's not that. They're not that on defense this year.
No, they're top 15 in points per game allowed. They're good. I mean, they're always going to be a good team. I mean, that's just the identity of Kirk Ferentz and his team. I will say though, I do want to give them some flowers here. I don't want to make it sound like I'm just bashing Iowa, but it's like, but then you come through. Caleb Johnson is a beast in the backfield. I mean, he's what, second in the nation or something, behind only somebody who's doing some freakish, unreal things in Ashton Genty, who's leading the country in rushing. But he had 206 yards rushing last week. He had 3 touchdowns. I mean, like, this is a dude, or excuse me, it was 206 yards and 3 touchdowns when they beat Minnesota. I mean, this is a guy who can do big stuff. I mean, like, you can just turn around and hand him the ball. The problem is you're going up against a Knowles defense that is, Jim Knowles what he's able to do on a defense has been tremendous for Ohio State. It's been one of the least talked about things on the national stage over the last 3 or so years, is the way that he's transformed this defense and turned them into a tough, hard-nosed type of team. Iowa is not able. Their big advantage historically in this game, what little ones that they have, was that physicality. They were able to punch them a little bit when they were on offense and hold on to the football and muck it up that way. This is an Ohio State defense, especially in that front seven, where they have some dudes on that defensive line. They got some dudes on that defensive line. And they always had talent, but it always felt like they were lacking on that level of toughness. They're not lacking in toughness. And I just don't see a path forward for Iowa. But you potentially have some Will Howard turnovers. Caleb Johnson finds a little bit of success in the rushing attack. And that's it. I mean, if that doesn't work, then I don't really see another path forward.
Yeah, it just, to me, the defense is just not good enough this year. I mean, I know they pitched a shutout in their opener. They gave up 20 to Iowa State. Even in a win, they gave up 21 to Troy, 14 to
undefeated
Minnesota.
Iowa State.
Yeah, I mean, there were times in the past couple of years where like they went like 8 games without giving up double digits. That's just not what this defense is this year. It's going to be very tough for them to stay in this game.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just one of those games. They'll have a lot of punts. I don't know. They cheer for punts up there, but we'll see. All right, let's move back to the SEC because there's another interesting matchup here. We talked about the way teams respond after a loss when we talked about the Georgia game earlier. This is a Lane Kiffin team that's coming off of one of the more brutal losses of the season to this point. I mean, another loss to an SEC team that they're supposed to beat, that would be killer to this Ole Miss team. I mean, I understand the South Carolina team is pretty solid, but Ole Miss should go on the road. They should get a win against South Carolina, but they also should have been at home and gotten a win against Kentucky. I want to see how Ole Miss responds. That's really what it comes down to. Jackson Dart and company, you were pegged as this juggernaut on offense. Now you're going to be tasked with the team that They can put you in a blender in that pass rush. That pass rush is something filthy for South Carolina. It's going to be a different type of test, and it's going to be a similar test to what you saw in Kentucky. Maybe not quite as physical as what Kentucky was able to do, but they're if they get you into third and long situations, South Carolina has shown that they can feast. They can really feast in those types of spots. So Ole Miss, just like Georgia, I expect you to win this game, but how do you respond after a loss? That's what I want to see.
Yeah, this is a real gut check for Ole Miss. This is not the sort of team in South Carolina that you're going to just walk into their building and recover from that Kentucky loss. They can get after it, like you mentioned. Kennard and Dylan Stewart are ready to roll on Jackson Dart, and they're expected to get their starting quarterback back. South Carolina is as well. Lenora Sellers, and obviously probably among other officiating decisions, one of the main reasons they lost that game to LSU was because he got hurt and they became very one-dimensional. I think if he had stayed healthy, they're probably sitting at 4-0. This is a very good 3-1 team, and I think they are a little bit underrated offensively because of what they bring to the table defensively.
Yep.
And the other aspect of this is for Jackson Dart, who wants to get Trey Harris open deep. I don't know if you have time.
FBS leading receiver Trey Harris.
Yeah, well, you may have to have him catch a couple of 10, 12-yard routes, not the 40, 50-yard routes, because I just don't know if your offensive line is going to hold up. And this is not the get right, make a statement, remind people we're still in this thing. South Carolina's not there just to be that squad. They're going to fight for this one. This one should be quietly one of the more competitive, better games of the day, I would imagine.
Yeah, the line's sitting somewhere in the range of like 9.5 or so. I bet it closes a little bit closer to 10 or 11. That wouldn't surprise me too much. But one thing I do want to not highlight, or I do want to highlight. Sorry, I got a puppy in my face. It's a return of Juice Wells to South Carolina. Of course, he was the prominent wide receiver, a focal point of their offense last year for South Carolina. He hits the transfer portal. He finished last year was almost 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. He was the number one thing that they had really going at the skill positions last year. But he's having a solid season over there with the Rebels this year. 14 receptions, 278 yards, 4 tutties. This feels like a juice game. You know, you talked about how you want to get Trey Harris open. I think they're going to go to Juice. I think this is a game where he's going to have something to prove. He's going to have a chip on his shoulder. And sometimes people just find that next level. Juice is talented enough to do something like that. He's also that kind of gritty slot guy who's kind of a gadgety type of player who they're going to get into spots to really make cause some problems for South Carolina. And whenever you have a potent pass rush like that, whenever they're able to attack you, I think that's where those gadget guys really become very valuable. And Trey Harris, he's probably one of the top wide receivers in the country. He's leading the country in receiving help. I mean, come on. But he's a guy who you want to do when you drop back and then Jackson Dart's got a little bit of time. To your point, Abe, you're going to want to try to get the ball down to him. So you'll stretch there, and then you got Juice on the outside or in the inside and playing these little interesting routes there. But I think this is one of those sneaky games. This is really one of those sneaky games because, Princely, the Florida transfer, I mean, he's pretty solid in this one as well. I mean, Ole Miss, he has been a little bit quiet, a little quieter than you would have expected here, but he's got 2.5 sacks over the last 2 games for the Rebels. And I think him coming in with Lenora Sellers here, this is a team that's been rolling. South Carolina's playing with a lot of confidence right now. They probably should be undefeated. They should be 4-0. But horseshoes and hand grenades, that's the only thing the close really counts. But Ole Miss, it should be fun for Jackson Dart and a very compelling 3:30 matchup. So if you're not watching, this is a multi-screen. This 3:30 window screams multi-screen. Any more comments on this one before we move on?
Well, I feel like I'm saying this every week when we talk about South Carolina, but if Ole Miss can protect Jackson Dart, they should be able to find ways to win in this game. But if that defensive line has its way and they have trouble creating a pocket, holding a pocket, and giving him time, this game's going to be up for grabs. And South Carolina has done. That's what happened in Kentucky. Is they just didn't give him a chance offensively, and we'll see if they can do that on Saturday as well.
Yeah, that's going to be the point of emphasis there. But let's move into a point of emphasis for Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers, who look, Dabo Swinney is looking to do something really cool. And I think this is the perfect game to do it. He might win his 174th game in the ACC, Abe. And that would be an ACC record. Abe, do you know who he'd pass with this?
I would assume
Bobby Bowden. How great would it be if you're a Clemson person and you're able to go into Tallahassee and surpass Bobby Bowden on his home field? That'd be pretty cool if you're a Clemson Tiger against a team that a lot of people circled at the beginning of the season as this was going to be the game to likely decide the ACC. I mean, it was a game where a lot of people thought that Florida State was going to return. They were back. They were returned to prominence. But here comes Clemson, and here comes reality for Florida State. Clemson, I want to say this really quickly. I'm going to turn it over to you for your comments. And this was a Clemson team that everybody thought they had the book on after 1 week of football. They're a team that got smacked in the face. They really did. Georgia took their lunch money and threw it back in their face, and they threw everything back at them. They're now up to 15th in the country. They're 3-1, and they've been averaging somewhere in the range of like 50 points a game. They've been fantastic. The response of Clemson on offense has been tremendous. And I feel like Florida State is just the next thing in line for them. They're a team that's rolling.
Look, there's almost no glory in a win at Florida State for Clemson. DJU is out. The Seminoles are going to have to start Brock Glenn. I'd be shocked if I didn't see enough of him at the end of the year when Jordan Travis went out last year. I just don't expect any sort of upgrade or difference in the offense. It probably won't be much of a downgrade the way that DJU have been playing this season. But, yeah, I mean, the way Clemson has been rolling, like, there's no glory in a victory here. Like, it's business as usual. Like, take Florida State, take that name away from it. They ought to handle this team, and that's what I expect them to do. I'd be looking for a double-digit victory. Anything short of that would be mildly disappointing, to be honest.
Yeah, and one big note here, DJ Uiagalelei. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this game, but look, I did want to throw in that nugget there for Dabo Swinney because that is a bit of history. Dabo Swinney, of course, not Dabo Swinney. Bobby Bowden had a lot more wins as the head coach of Florida State, but a lot of those came from before they joined the league. But one quick note here on DJU. DJ Uiagalelei has been, there's a little or next to his name now. Apparently there are some injuries coming with DJU. It may just be that he's getting benched. Brock Glenn might be making.
No, he broke a finger. He's out. He broke a finger. He's not going to play.
Okay. Well, Brock Glenn is supposedly going to be making the start here. It's going to be his third career start. And look, the last time we saw Brock Glenn it was the game against Louisville, and then there was that game against Georgia. And those were not super fantastic results for the Florida State Seminoles. But let's move on here because, look, Clemson should roll in this game, but I did want to just give some flowers there to Dabo Swinney here. But another game in the ACC, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, they've got the Duke Blue Devils, an undefeated Duke Blue Devils team that's unranked for some reason until you actually take a look at that strength of record. Not super awesome. Malik Murphy under center there at quarterback. He's had a pretty solid season for the Blue Devils. First year over there in Durham. But when the best win that you have is North Carolina, that's not super great, especially when that team just had 70 points dropped on their head the week before by James Madison, a group of 5 team. Albeit a good group of 5 team, but still a group of 5 team. 70 points is pretty brutal. You go beyond that game. That's a game that you also trailed by, 2-3 touchdowns at one point. You were getting blasted in that game until a beautiful, resilient second-half comeback. But the point stands that you were getting blasted in that game. Outside of that, you also look and you have a win against UConn. You have a win against Elon. You have a win against Northwestern in overtime. Not great. It's not a great strength of schedule. This is really the first test for Duke, and it's a Georgia Tech team that's now going to be coming off of a bye week that they desperately needed, a bye week that they took full advantage of. Haynes King and company, like this is an offense that was pretty banged up along the offensive line, and they were one of the most worked teams in the country through the early parts of the season. They played that week 0 game. Florida State got their bye week, I think sometime around like week 3 or so, but still earlier in the season than Georgia Tech did. It was just the way the schedule fell. But look, this is a big game for Georgia Tech. They got to get back on the winning side of things. And Brent Key is also, I think he's like 10-1 or something. He has a really good record coming off of a loss. So this just feels like a game that Georgia Tech should roll.
Yeah, I don't necessarily feel the same way. I'm not saying they won't, but I wouldn't say it with confidence, at least on my end. I mean, you say they took advantage of a bye week. I would say let's wait and see, because if they didn't figure out how to stop the passing game of their opponent, then a bye week wasted. I think Louisville beat them because they couldn't defend the pass. Certainly Syracuse beat them because they couldn't defend the pass. And now you got Malik Murphy coming in here with a 4-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. I think he's got 12 touchdowns and or maybe it's 3-to-1, 4 interceptions. I can't do math. Don't worry about me. Yeah, I mean, look, they are coming off a bye. I'm sure they did work on this, but if they did not improve in defending the pass, I think Duke is going to come in here and have an opportunity to win this game. And so that's what it's going to come down to is have they improved their pass defense? Quite frankly, I think Georgia Tech is good enough to compete on offense against pretty much everyone in the ACC. Outside of maybe Clemson, and at least the way Clemson is looking right now, and maybe Miami too. Miami, the way they throw the ball would cut them up too. But I'm interested to see if they can slow down Duke's pass game, because if they can, and as you said, good record off of a loss, they took advantage of the bye week. They're at home. There are opportunities here for Georgia Tech, but man, they've got to get better in the pass D, because that's the glaring weakness of this team right now.
Yeah, and it was 10-1, by the way. Brent Key is 10-1 coming off of a loss. So talk about comebacks. He's not somebody who loses multiple games in a row. It's just not something that seems to happen. But on top of that, Haynes King has also not been sacked a single time this year. Duke has a productive pass rush, but we'll see. It's going to be strength against strength there in this one too. But Star Thomas is the guy for Duke. That's outside of just Malik Murphy. He was able to really put on a good show over there against UNC last week. He had 166 yards against UNC. So that should be good for them. I mean, look, I want to see what they can do. The Georgia Tech defense, Tyler Santucci, of course, he is the former Duke defensive coordinator. He made the move to Georgia Tech, so it's going to be his former team. I wonder if that's going to have any effect on this game. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch here. So should be a good one over there on the Flats, 8 o'clock on ACC Network. The next big one, we'll go back to the SEC. It's Tennessee and it's Arkansas. And speaking of games that just feel weird, this is one of them. I fully expect Tennessee to win this game. It wouldn't be an upset otherwise, but this is a Tennessee team on defense that has not really been tested at all. Specifically, their secondary. One of the biggest glaring weaknesses for Tennessee over the last couple of years has been consistently that secondary. Maybe Taylon Green is going to be enough to actually test that secondary, not meaning that Tennessee is necessarily weak in that regard. Just the fact that we haven't seen them been pressed. They haven't been pushed all that much. Maybe they respond and they just do more of the same and they're just, really good. But we haven't seen it yet. Taylon Green and company, I think, should at least give it that real big test. Because Oklahoma, outside of maybe this game right here, it's Oklahoma. And it's a road environment. It's a raucous environment. But I don't think that Jackson Arnold was really pushing you all that much necessarily. So Tennessee, I think they should win this game, but it is another road environment. In Arkansas, that's a place that can be very difficult to play at times. I mean, that place it turns into a hornet's nest if given the opportunity. And if Arkansas can, potentially run the ball effectively and Taylon Green can make some things happen with his legs and then potentially with his arm, you might be looking at a test here for Tennessee that they weren't expecting.
I'm not as confident in that. I think this game.
I'm not super confident in that, by the way. I just think
it plays into Tennessee's hands. The way Arkansas needs to be in a shootout to win, and I just don't think you want to get into a shootout with Tennessee's offense. Like I do think that, and not that I agree with you, Oklahoma wasn't really threatening, but I think it's that sort of team that's got a defense that can get you off the field a couple of times in each half. I just don't know if Arkansas is that squad, and I don't think their offense is quite good enough to keep up with Tennessee. I don't think their defense is quite good enough to get Tennessee off the field enough times to make this competitive. I'm not saying it's a blowout, but it might be comfortable. And you're right, Arkansas, Fayetteville gets weird. Tennessee's lost the last 3 times that they've been to Fayetteville. But yeah, I just think the way this Arkansas team needs to win games this year, it plays right into Tennessee's hands.
Yeah, Dylan Sampson's one specifically that I'm going to watch. Look, we've said it before on this podcast, and they're a team that wants to run the ball. Dylan Sampson leads the SEC in yards per game. I think he is going to be the focal point of this team again, but I have a feeling about this Arkansas rushing attack. I don't know why. I mean, like Jaquindon Jackson's, the dude is a force on the ground. He's a wrecking ball. It's ground, it's pound, and that is something I'm going to see from Arkansas. But Taylor Green is just going to cause more problems than anything that Tennessee's seen this season. I don't necessarily think that it's there's the recipe for an upset's there. I don't know if Arkansas is consistent enough to really, make Tennessee pay when it comes down to brass tacks. But I want to see Nico, step up in an environment where he has to win a shootout. We haven't seen him do that yet. We assume that he would because this team dominated and put up a lot of points. We assume. But when that pressure is on and you have to turn around and score yourself because they're coming after you and you have a bad feeling that they're going to score too, that's where I want to see Nico step up, because I have a feeling that at some point down the line, Tennessee is going to be in that kind of scoring battle. It might be the third Saturday in October. So it might be coming sooner rather than later, but this is kind of a foreshadowing, if you will, of what that game is going to potentially look like. I think we're going to get a couple more answers about Tennessee. I don't think that Arkansas is necessarily going to have enough firepower to really come to put together a full 4 quarters and win this game. We've seen crazier things in the SEC, but I don't know necessarily if that's going to be the game to get it done. But Squirrel White, Dylan Sampson, you've got some beasts on the outside here for Tennessee. So we'll see what they can do in this one. Tennessee ranking very highly on defense, by the way, and they just haven't been tested. And I'm eager to see that happen. But UNLV is a team that been in the news for a lot of different reasons. But what do you think about this one? Syracuse against UNLV.
Yeah, obviously UNLV was in the news because the quarterback Sluka is stepping away and a running back did as well. But they did not miss a beat a week ago. They blew out Fresno State, who was a pretty good Fresno State team. And it was the best offensive performance they've had. Now they got to go and deal, albeit at home, with a Syracuse offense that we've seen can light it up at times. So I'm just really interested in this game. I think it's another opportunity for UNLV to make a statement on national TV. And just if it's like the past, because it is a Friday game, if it's anything like the games that have been played the past couple of Fridays, like make sure you stay up for it, because the past couple of weeks have been crazy on Friday nights. I think this one could be as well.
Yeah, I mean, because this is a Rebels team that relies heavily on a rushing attack, and you have a new quarterback under center. They've got a lot of eyeballs on them. It's going to be a Friday night game, like you mentioned. It's going to be happening 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever time, 9 o'clock, I think, on Friday night. But Kyle McCord, I mean, this is a guy who, I mean, they've played some funky games, man. Kyle McCord has had that kind of ebbs and flows, and they had a loss earlier, and they were up in the top 25, and then they fall all the way down. But 364 yards passing. It's going to be kind of an interesting duel here between these two. This is just one of those games, like you mentioned, Friday night show. The lights pop on, and we've had some crazy games on Friday night, so this is definitely one to keep your eye on. But another one is going to be coming up 7:30 on NBC. Michigan in Seattle. This is one where I think you said that Washington was actually favored in this one. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think that makes, I mean, Michigan fresh off of kind of a disappointing matchup against Minnesota where they won. Oh shoot, what's the name of the trophy? I'm blanking on it. But they won a trophy with against Minnesota in that one. And look, Michigan is a team that has very firmly squared away in whatever, in their identity, whatever they want to do with the ball. When it's on their side, they want to run it. They want to ground and pound. Or Alex Orji was able to connect, and he had a passing touchdown, actually, if you can believe it. but they want to run the football. I want to see what they can do on the road in a different environment because most of these performances have come in Ann Arbor. This is a trip out west. This is their first big trip out west. It won't be their last.
Yeah, this is the Khalil Mulling show. It has to be for Michigan. They continue to be relatively limited, one-dimensional, and I know they're bringing Orji along slowly, and they're developing him in the pass game, and they're trying to find some looks that work for him. But it hasn't mattered a ton because Mullings has been so good, so explosive, so dynamic, essentially doing for the Michigan offense what we thought Donovan Edwards was going to be able to do. But it's been all Mullings for the most part. Look. There's not much to say about this game. I think it can be competitive. I think it can be fun to watch. It might be a little ugly at times. It's a rematch of the national championship game. And I know neither of these teams are anywhere close to what they were a couple of months ago when they met for a title. But it's a nice little rematch. It's now not a rivalry, but a conference game. So just a quick mention there. But if anything, I'll probably watch these two teams and be like, boy, how far have these guys fallen from what that game meant back in January.
Yeah, it's the little brown jug. That's what it is. The little brown jug. I blanked on it, and I could not, for the life of me, remember what it was. The little brown jug. One of those really cool trophies that they hand out in college football that I've always thought that that's kind of thing is really cool. But look, this is the sixth game of the season for Michigan. It's going to be their first on the road. It's going to be interesting. Ground and pound types of teams tend to travel just fine. I just want to see Washington put together a more consistent game. You had the loss against Rutgers last week where they dominate possession, but you get hurt by penalties. You miss field goals. You struggle in the red zone. That's the recipe to lose games, especially in the Big Ten. That's the story of the Big Ten. You got to win those types of situations. And if you want to win this game against Michigan, yes, you're at home. You'll have a raucous environment, but you can't do that kind of thing against Michigan. Doesn't matter if Michigan's up or down. That mentality of that team, you give the door, you leave the door open. They've shown that they're going to kick it right in. But let's follow College Game Day out west. What do you say, Abe? California, first time ever that they are going to be out there at Berkeley. Miami is going to be making that trip alongside of them, fresh off of another one of those crazy Friday night games against Virginia Tech where they snuck by. They got by the skin of their teeth in that one, potentially just an elbow or a hand placement away from potentially losing that game, according to the official. But we won't get into that. What we will talk about is the fact that this is woke versus Coke. Have you seen that on social media, on Twitter? Woke versus Coke. Make the t-shirt. It'll be all over the place. It's kind of a recreation of Catholics versus convicts. But Cal and Miami in an ACC matchup because that makes sense. The Miami equipment truck has been cataloging its journey across the United States because it makes complete sense that a team from Miami is traveling all the way over to the West Coast to play in an Atlantic Coast Conference game. But Cal's been really good this season. I mean, they've been nothing but successful for the most part. 3-1 on the year, pretty great start for them. Their first year in the ACC. Looking at how much better would it be, though, if you get a win against Miami?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you get a win against Miami, I mean, College Game Day is choosing it. I don't know why. I have a tough time believing in Cal.
It's because they've never been there and there's not.
No, I get it. I get it. They always try and get cute, but like at the same time, like just go to a better game. Like who cares? But yeah, the question for me is, what was last week for Miami? Was that maybe a little blip? They just didn't show up and they escaped and it was a wake up call. Or is it maybe a larger issue, a sign of things to come? And certainly you mentioned going on the road now all the way out to Cal. How does that impact them playing very late Eastern time, something they certainly do not do? Yeah. And so we'll see. But again, for me, it's time for Cam Ward to try and do whatever he can to keep pace with Jalen Milroe, Travis Hunter in that Heisman race, because those two guys have jumped out to a very big lead right now after his performance a week ago. He had his moments. But yeah, just game day's there. I get it. Marshawn Lynch is going to say some wild stuff on the show, and that's cool. This is a really tough sell that Cal is going to stay in this game.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing. It's an opportunity to go talk about Miami a little bit. Their schedule this year is not super awesome, so they want to cover a Miami game. And then Cam Ward, you said he's keeping pace. Yeah, well, he's averaging what, 300 yards in every game, and he's 3 touchdowns in all 5 of his games. He's had those kinds of stat lines.
I mean, he's a
He's been
very
pretty dang
clearly
good.
distant third. So yes,
We'll see. He just hasn't
trying to
had the
keep
big
pace.
games, I would say. He hasn't had the big opportunities in the same way that some of those other guys have had. But Abe, it's a crazy week, man. It's been this is just, there are a lot of games that feel like there's one big favorite. Those are always the weeks where something crazy seems to happen. I just have this nagging feeling it's going to be someone. I don't know who it's going to be just yet. Is it going to be Georgia? Maybe Ole Miss, maybe it's going to be Michigan, but I feel like there's some top 15 team that is going to get just a pinky toe to the side of a door or something crazy. You're just going to stub your toe and it's going to be nasty and ugly and you're going to, yeah, it's nasty. Someone's going to lose. We'll see. I don't know who it's going to be, but it always feels like it happens on weeks like this. But folks, we do this every single week, twice a week. Give you previews. We give you reactions. We'll be talking about this week. A crazy week. Maybe, says me. Maybe not, says Abe Gordon, but we will do that here. So make sure to follow, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to follow along. We get our Twitter handles right there. So at GChefATL, at Abe Gordon. Give us a follow there. We do these live broadcasts on Twitter. We do it on YouTube. We're all over the place. So make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. We talk college football here on the College Football Overtime Podcast, and we have a lot of fun doing it. We hope you do too. We will see you again very soon. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you.